over to you, Julie.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julie Petty and I work with Meat and Livestock Australia. Welcome to today's webinar, which is all around profitable grazing systems. It's the second webinar in the series we're running, and today's webinar focuses all around supported learning projects and some tips and tools for writing those. This webinar was originally recorded on the 10th of August. Unfortunately, we had some issues with the technology that day and the audio from that webinar recording is unusable. So we're re-recording this. We've made sure that we've noted down the questions that were asked in the live recording, so we'll make sure we address those in this as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two presenters and guest speakers today from Macquarie Franklin. So we've got Leanne Sheriff and Basil Doonan, who will be giving us a bit of an overview and run through of the supported learning programs. So over to you guys.
Thanks, Julie. Just by way of introduction, just to work through what is a supported learning project and why we're going down the path of a supported learning approach. Firstly, a definition of supported learning program is basically one that generally focuses on skill development and capacity building through the life of the project. So it's a bit chicken and egg. Unless you focus on skill development, you generally don't need support, but to get skill development, you almost always require support. So the projects going forward are primarily developed around a coaching model. So they incorporate best practice science, but give participants an opportunity to practice and to implement those skills within their farming business. So the key outcomes from supported learning activities are improved capability and practice linked with improvement in business performance. So quite a bit of evidence around now to suggest that those primary producers in the top 10, 20% have a higher level of capability, and that's the primary driver of business performance. Increased participant skills and confidence, so development of the skills, practicing of the skills, implementation of the skills results in improved level of confidence once people see the outcomes, and improved ability to process data and evidence into knowledge and corresponding action. So being able to hang some numbers on things rather than just work on basic trends or relationships. Linking cause and effect on farm. So we want opportunities through that coaching model to be able to change things on farm and then come back as a group and observe what those changes have resulted in. And an ability to evaluate these decisions from an economic or farming systems perspective. So again, just being able to hang some numbers on things, relate those to price and product relationships, and make economic decisions once those skills are in place. I touched briefly on why MLA has chosen to go down this path, but primarily they want to take a more direct approach in terms of influencing the skill and capability of primary producers in order to drive business productivity and profitability. So historically, been a lot of awareness, information, knowledge building activities. So it's logical that the next step now will be to move into the practice change and skill development space. So the critical components of supported learning projects are opportunities to evaluate outcomes of skill development on management capability or business performance. So that whole farm business approach and or a marginal cost, marginal revenue approach. Opportunities to implement new practices in the farming system with peer support. So a strong focus on the practical application of theory and principles. Practice and reinforcement of the skills and knowledge. So we understand that without opportunities to practice, without skill development being reinforced, it doesn't last and it doesn't become embedded. Based on peer-reviewed scientific principles, So it can't be anecdotal type approach to learning or skill development, but it does have to be practically applied. And one of the most common approaches in that area is to develop rules of thumb and things like that. Encourage participants to find their own solutions. So I think one of the big issues is not always being able to accurately define the problem and to adopt a random approach to solving those problems. In this instance, we want the farmers, primary producers, to be able to find their own results. Often that's not easy when you've got consultants as coaches who are used to providing answers, but in this instance, the coaches are responsible for working the participants back to the fundamental principle and then bringing them back forward to a problem-solving position. And then once the problem's identified, I guess we know there's many ways to skin a cat, and so we want to provide an opportunity for peer-on-peer learning there, because often the participants have the best way of solving the problem. The challenge is often identifying the problem.
Okay, thanks, Basil. What I'd just like to briefly talk about are the profitable grazing system curriculums that were developed as part of the pilot project last year by a technical group of people with expertise in the appropriate areas. The curriculums focused on 5 key pillars that have been identified as being key business profit driver areas, and they are the feed base, business, reproduction and genetics, people and value chain. And where appropriate, those curriculums have been split to cover different regions or different species. So for example, you can see there with the reproduction and genetics, we've got them for goats, sheep, northern beef and southern beef, and feed base has been split into southern feed base and a northern feed base and rangelands. The curriculums are available on the MLA website. You can see the link there, and we strongly encourage service providers who are thinking about getting involved in profitable grazing systems and writing their own program to have a look at the curriculums and see what's in them. Deliverers are encouraged to think about mix and matching and not necessarily be constrained to one curriculum area, but there needs to be care taken not to fall into the trap of just taking quick snapshots of all of the curriculums and not drilling down and doing the skill development as Basil's previously outlined. So the curriculums are all constructed in the same format, where there's a session number identified, the learning outcome, which is what we want the participants to get out of that particular session, and that relates to what the learning topics are that are going to be covered. The learning topics that were identified by the technical group who developed the curriculum are very much focused on what are the key profit drivers within that curriculum area, what are the things that people really need to know and be able to do well to improve their business profitability. Those learning topics and learning outcomes then relate to learning activities. So how are you going to conduct the activity so that the learning outcomes are achieved? For example, you might want producers to be able to condition score an animal. So the learning activity might be getting hands-on with animals in the race or in the yards and learning how to do that and practicing that. And finally, we've got learning tools and resources. So what are the supporting materials that you'll need in order for participants to be able to learn? So that's the quick snapshot of the curriculums. They're a really valuable resource and really strongly encourage people to have a look at those.
Okay, so now just a couple of examples of some supported learning projects. These were circulated prior to the webinar, and they're based on tennis skills for beginners. So I guess when it comes to skill development, sport is probably the pinnacle. So probably easier to think of when you're writing supported learning projects as of sport as an example. So in this instance, we've used tennis, and I'm going to flick between example A and example B. Over the last 3 years, myself and Leanne have probably looked at 40 or 50 project applications. In that space, I would say, and I'm generalising, most of the problems around writing the projects come in the area of the learning topics and the learning activities. So learning outcomes, okay. Most people are able to identify what they want people to learn as a result of a session or a program, but linking that with the learning topics and then the activities appears to be the major challenge. So between example A and example B here, I'm going to focus on the learning topics and the learning activities. So remembering that both these project applications or programs are aimed at achieving the same outcome, learning outcomes. Hopefully it'll identify some obvious differences between the two, which are mainly the issues that we find from the coach. Participants start hitting the balls and there's some coaching on their technique. In example B, we have, thanks Leanne. So now I just want to run through a couple of examples of supported learning projects. Got two that were circulated prior to the webinar. They've both been developed around tennis skills for beginners. And using sport as an example, I guess clearly in sport, performance is all about skill development. So it's often good practice when you're developing these projects to think about sport as an example in the background behind the specific technical area that you're actually addressing. Over the last 3 or 4 years, I guess Leanne and I have looked at 40 or 50 applications for supported learning projects, and we'd say the main issues for people come in the area of linking the learning topics to the learning outcome and then linking the learning activities to the learning topics. So they're the two areas I'm going to focus on in the two examples, so example A and example B. Most people tend to get the learning outcomes either at a session level or whole of project level pretty right. And the tools and learning resources are reasonably easy to link up with the activities once you have those bedded down. So in the first instance here in example A, learning topics are Tennis 101, the rules of tennis and hitting the ball forehand. The associated learning activities are a presentation which runs through the basic rules of tennis and basic techniques. And then it's straight into a practical session. So out on court, how to hold the racket, how to hit the ball, demonstration by the coach. Participants start hitting balls and there's some coaching on their technique. If we look at example B, we're looking at the rules of tennis and how to play the game. The learning activities, presentation by an experienced referee who runs through the basic rules of tennis, presentation by an experienced coach on holding the racket, hitting the ball and serving, and then participants watch a video of some tennis games with slow motion footage so techniques can be observed. Session 2, example A, is hitting the ball forehand and hitting the ball backhand. So it's practical forehand, so there's a reminder and demonstration by the coach on how to hit a forehand correctly, linked to session 1. Participants hit forehand shots with some coaching on technique, and then backhand, a demonstration on how to hit a backhand, and participants start hitting backhand shots. And then there's a theory refresher session, view a video, and they get to referee in small groups. Session 2 and example B is focused around getting the right tennis equipment, but also hitting the ball forehand and hitting the ball backhand. So there's a presentation by a racket manufacturer on the differences between rackets and how to choose the right racket for you. When it comes to forehand, a video of forehand strokes, a demo by the coach on how to hit a forehand correctly. Participants hit a few forehand shots. Session 3, example A, is hitting a forehand, hitting a backhand and serving. So A bit of a refresher on the simple rules as the group practices foot placement. Participants hit forehand shots with some coaching on their technique. There's a reminder and demonstration on how to hit a backhand correctly. Participants hit backhand shots and there's some coaching on their technique again. Then they add to that serving. So watch a video on serving in slow motion, demonstration by the coach on serving technique. Participants practice serving. Their technique is critiqued by others in the small groups and the coach, who provides additional technical guidance. Session 3, example B, hitting the ball backhand and serving. So when it comes to backhand, there's a video of the backhand strokes, demo by the coach on how to hit a backhand correctly, and participants hit some backhand shots. Serving, there's a video on different serves, and a tennis pro, renowned for his great serve, demonstrates serving to the group, and participants get to practice some serves. Session 4, example A, hitting the ball forehand, hitting the ball backhand, serving, and adding topspin and backspin to the forehand and backhand. And then how to play the game and some discussion around strategy. So the learning activities is a refresher on the rules again, and a bit more around foot placement. Forehand, so the participants are straight into forehand shots with some coaching on technique. Similarly with backhand, straight into hitting backhand strokes with some coaching on technique. Similar again with serving, so by now they can serve and they're just getting the opportunity to practice, and there's some coaching on technique. Then they add topspin and backspin, so there's a practice exercise and then an opportunity to practice the game. So the group split into players and referees and rotate the roles. Example B, session 4, how to play the game. So they visit a tournament with tennis pros playing. They get to meet the tennis pros and learn about the finer points of the game. There's a presentation on footwear and what to consider when buying footwear. Session 5, the last session in example A, is putting it all together, playing the game. So there's a warm-up and practice with a bit of coaching on their overall technique. Groups split into teams and play a round-robin tournament, taking the turns to referee and play, and then there's a post-game celebration. Session 5, example B, playing the game. Participants get to the tennis court and try out their new gear and serves. So I think clearly there you can see some major differences in those two examples. Just in terms of putting together these programs, I think one of the things that often comes up is there seems to be a need to have a jam-packed program, and that every new session there's new material, often a new speaker, little opportunity to reflect and refresh and practice. So in most cases, a supported learning program will only introduce 2 to 3 new skills. And a good example might be something like condition scoring and food on offer might be the 2 key skills for a whole 5 learning outcome, learning activity based project, which might go over 12 to 18 months. Whereas we're finding that often people are trying to introduce way too many skills or substituting lectures or interesting talks or things of that nature instead of opportunities to practice and refresh and reflect. So it looks repetitious on paper, but certainly the feedback from participants is that they really enjoy that opportunity to practice and to practically implement it on farm and to see the outcomes. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Basil. So I just wanted to touch on the delivery model that we've seen used by some of the supported learning projects during Farm 300 and the PGS pilot project last year. I guess the most important thing to have in your mind as a deliverer when you're designing these programs is that it is a commercial delivery model, and so it's got to both stack up for you as a deliverer and also in the value proposition for what you're going to be offering to producers. And how you choose to design and structure your program is going to have a major impact on the costs to deliver it, especially in remote areas. So I guess, yeah, so frame that in your thinking as you design your program. Of course, the other critical thing to think about is the types of skills that you're teaching and how they're best taught, and whether they can be taught by some practical hands-on sessions as a group, and then there's maybe an opportunity for homework activities to be set, and then one-on-one kind of phone calls, for example, to follow up and see how they're tracking, or group webinars so that people can log in remotely and have that little check-in with how they're tracking, and if they've got any questions or issues to workshop with the group. So there's, yeah, so that's sort of two key things I think to think about when you're thinking about designing your programs. There is, as I've kind of indicated, a whole range of different delivery mechanisms that can be used, from group workshops, webinars, one-on-one activities, either in person or via phone, and then combinations of all of those coming in and out over the life of the program as needed. We've had some examples of coaches trying to use tools such as iMessenger or Facebook groups to connect the groups and encourage the conversation to continue between sessions and enable people to deal with issues or challenges between sessions. The other thing to consider as well is around the catering aspects of programs. That can add a cost as well, and getting participants to bring their own lunch, having sessions on farm wherever possible so there's no venue costs. They all help to reduce the cost of delivery and also keep the program really grounded into what it is that you're actually trying to do in terms of the focus on learning outcomes. We're recommending a minimum group size of 6, but no set maximum group size. That'll depend on, again, what the kinds of skills are that you're teaching, how hands-on the coach needs to be with the participant, and also how experienced the coach is. And one of the critical things in the process, as I've touched on, is around getting the participants to commit to taking action and making change, and then following up that commitment in subsequent sessions. So that's it from me. So Julie, can I hand over to you to run through some of the questions that we had?
No problem. Thanks very much, Leanne. So we had a few questions during the live session that we'll just quickly run through now to make sure that all of those are addressed in this recording. So there was a question that came through regarding the number of sessions, and if there is, if you can have too many sessions.
I don't think you can have too many. They probably diminish in value over time. So you need to have the right amount of sessions to introduce and refine the skill development to a point where people are basically competent in the skill and it's more or less fine tuning. We've certainly had a number of supported learning programs that probably have gone for 18 months, and then the groups decided to stick together for another 18 months, so probably another 6 or 8 sessions to refine the skills, but also to add new skills. So I think you just got to look at whatever's appropriate. And as Leanne said, it is a commercial model. So at some, if you can deliver the skill development in 3 or 4 sessions, then that's fine. If you need 5 or 6, then obviously it's going to cost more.
Thanks, Basil. Are there any rules around which tools and whatnot should be used in the program?
Okay. I guess where deliverers have got their own tools, proprietary tools, for example, that they've developed and want to use as part of the program, then that's absolutely fine. Because MLA is supporting and investing in profitable grazing systems, deliverers are encouraged to use MLA tools and resources wherever they are available and appropriate. But if there isn't an MLA tool that can fill the need, and for example, there's a state Department of Ag tool or a tool that someone else has developed that you have access to, then there's no problem with using those. The most important thing is that they're appropriate to the learning activities and the learning outcomes.
Thanks, Leanne. Are you able to build a supported learning program off the back of another event, say what we would call a feeder event?
Yeah, absolutely. I think feeder events have developed as critical recruitment activities. So to be able to move to this commercial model, we do have to demonstrate a much higher level of value, particularly around the user pay component. So feeder activities provide that opportunity. The other opportunity to come off the back of something is historically a lot of theory-based 2-day, 1-day workshops have been delivered, and they've presented theory really well, even a bit of practical application, but given no real opportunity for people to practice and develop skills for implementation in that space. So we're finding that the coaching component bolts on really nicely to some of those historical workshops that have been more about information and knowledge.
Thanks, Basil. Will there be specific presenters for specific curriculums?
No, so we're leaving it up to, again, because we're focusing on a commercial model, we're leaving it up to deliverers to determine where they have appropriate areas of expertise and where they believe there's demand and where they wish to put their energy into developing a package.
Cool. Thanks, Leanne. And I guess it also comes back to if people are being brought in for specific topics and whatnot, that's an additional cost for that that program, that model.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess, yeah, as you say, as you bring in more people to be part of the program, then it increases the costs to deliver it. So focusing on an area where you have expertise and can play a role as a coach will help to get those costs down. And as Basil said, sometimes consultants find it hard to be a coach, and in the past we've been able to deliver models where, for example, the theory is given by a technical expert and then the coaching components are done by a high-performing producer who's already living those principles and really comfortable with coaching and helping other producers to implement it practically.
Cool. Thanks. Basil, did you want to talk at all about the time factor in terms of developing up a supported learning project and give some guidance there?
Yeah, I think it is an issue that people are sort of saying, well, how long does it take? And my experience is that if you allowed a day to get together a draft and a day probably to fine-tune that and tidy it up, that around the 2-day mark is what it takes to develop a project. I also think that, you know, the way this is structured, obviously there's the opportunity to develop one project and deliver it multiple times. So it's probably a reasonably good investment. On top of that, in this instance, the IP sits with the project proponent. So, you know, if you can do it once and there's reasonable demand for it, then, yeah, a good commercial investment.
Yeah, so there's potential if it's filling the needs of all parties that you can just keep using that template you've already developed.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a question that came through just wanting a bit of an update about what's happening with the state and national coordinators. During the live webinar, Renelle Jeffries gave a bit of an update on that and just spoke about the state coordinators for most states were getting contracted just at the present. And we should be seeing activity with those state coordinators early in September.
Can I just say as well, Julie, that I've encouraged people to have a look at the curriculums if they're thinking about developing their own supported learning project. But before they actually put pen to paper, it's a really good idea for them to contact the state coordinators if they're on board, or either myself or Basil, to talk about their idea before they invest too much time into it, so we can give them a little bit of a guidance and, you know, make sure it is going to be a fit for profitable grazing systems.
Yeah, really good idea. We also had a question come through just about how long it'll take projects to start, and I guess that's about, you know, how suitable the draft is that's coming through, how long it takes you to get the monitoring and evaluation sorted out, and then it's the contracting process.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, we endeavour to turn them around as quickly as we can, but as you say, it just depends on how many reviews are required.
And in terms of the workflow, the monitoring and evaluation, where that fits in, because you develop up your supported learning program first, don't you?
Yep, so you develop up your supported learning project first, and then once that's approved, the next step is to sit down and think about your recruitment strategy with the state coordinator, and also at the same time to look at your monitoring and evaluation. And the next webinar in the series, which will be webinar 3, will cover off on all things monitoring and evaluation, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, excellent. So if there's no further comments, Basil and Leanne, from you guys, we might wrap up.
Yep. I've just put up the slide, Julie, now, which has the dates and times for the upcoming webinars in the Service Provider Profitable Grazing Systems series. So, yeah, people can just note those down if they're available. Otherwise, the webinars will be recorded and made available.
Yeah, absolutely. We have already circulated a bit of an evaluation form as well for participants. We're just chasing some feedback about how you're finding the process, how you'd like to be engaged in working with the program, and what it is you need. So we're just trying to be mindful of how we can better service those people who are wanting to be involved in the program. So if there's no further comments, we might wrap up there.
Yep, none from us. Thanks, Julie.
No worries. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining in. We apologise for the IT issues we had when we hosted this live, but hopefully this webinar will be able to answer a lot of your questions and whatnot, and we'll have that up on the website as soon as we can. Thanks so much, everyone.